Welcome to the programme. We've just been watching First Minister's questions and two big issues today. Are universal services affordable? Specifically about the availability of cancer drugs on the NHS. That was a very controversial one in the Chamber. And also that old chestnut, the status of an independent Scotland in the EU. What legal advice does the Scottish Government have, and what is it? Joining me to discuss these issues and much more, we have Neil Bibby for the Labour Party and James Dornan for the SNP. Hello to you both. James Dornan, Joanne Lamont raises a very emotive issue talking about the availability of cancer drugs in the NHS. She talks about a constituent, Maureen Fleming, a grandmother of 10 who unfortunately has bowel cancer. She can't get the drugs she needs on the Scottish NHS. She's going to move to Newcastle because it's free. It's not really an advert for independence, is it?
It's a terrible situation for Mrs Fleming, and I'm sure there's other people in a similar situation. But the truth of the matter is that the Cancer Drugs Fund, which is mooted in England, is running out next year, as the First Minister said.
But it's available today.
The cancer charities themselves have said that the Cancer Drugs Fund is not the way forward here. And also that any pound spent in an end-of-life service could be a pound better spent at the beginning of the cancer services. And this is a very serious issue, and I really feel for Mrs Fleming and her family. But the government have to look at the picture in the round.
Neil Bibby, Maureen Fleming, it is a very sad case. Yes. If you were in power, if you were to provide these drugs on the NHS for free, where would you make other cuts?
Well, it's a very serious issue. The fact is there are people in Scotland like Maureen Fleming who aren't getting the cancer drugs that they require that are available in England, and we do need to look very seriously about how we get cancer patients the drugs that they need.
So all cancer drugs available under a Labour government?
We need to look at what we can provide and what improvements we can make in order to help people like Maureen Fleming. There has been a review as promised by the Scottish Government. That needs to be acted upon, and we need to move as fast as possible to ensure that cancer patients are getting the drugs that they need.
The First Minister accused the Labour Party, and of course yourself, because when this issue was actually voted on, the Labour Party supported free prescription charges, which Joanne Lamont was critical of today.
Well, we do need to have a look at how we fund public services in Scotland. The statistic that Joanne Lamont used today is that £7.2 million is spent on free prescriptions just for paracetamol. We need to look at and see if that is a good use of money, and obviously there is a number of that money could be used for a number of ways, and to look at drugs for cancer patients is certainly one of them. But we do need to look at the sustainability of public services. Joanne Lamont's made that point a number of times before, and we do need to look at how we can best fund cancer drugs for cancer patients.
James Dornan, it does seem to be an anomaly. Joanne Lamont talks about how you can walk into any shop, pay 19p for paracetamol, but it costs the NHS £3.10 to prescribe paracetamol on the NHS. The system's not working, is it?
How many people who can afford to pay for drugs such as paracetamol do? I mean, I know that I buy my paracetamol out supermarkets. I do not go into the chemist and get a prescription for paracetamol. This is a red herring by the Labour Party. The Labour Party voted for free prescriptions. They voted against the Cancer Drugs Fund. They're thrashing around looking for something, and then they take advantage of a situation such as this. A life and death situation, an incredibly serious situation, and the Labour Party bring it to the Chamber for political gain.
Neil Bibby, are you exploiting a women's situation for
political gain? Absolutely not the case. The fact is the issue of cancer drugs has been brought up 3 or 4 times now in the Chamber, and action hasn't been taken. The First Minister isn't listening to the concerns that are being raised and acting upon the concerns that have been raised. It's okay for James to say he will pay 19p for paracetamol because that's okay for him. The reality is, for people like Maureen Fleming, is that the cost of cancer drugs are £3,000 a month that are available, not available in Scotland, but they're available in England, and we need to look, listen to what's been said, and also act upon the concerns that are being raised, quite rightly, by Joanne Lamont on behalf of people living in Scotland.
This is a bigger issue than the cost of paracetamol. This is about free prescriptions. That's what Joanne Lamont was talking about today. And if there was 600,000 people earning £16,000 that are around that salary who are paying for free prescriptions, I know of people who wouldn't buy all their prescriptions because they couldn't afford them. Now they can afford them, and now the health service is better off, and their health is better because of our decisions that the Labour Party supported when it suited them.
But James Dornan, just because you know people that don't put their prescription charges through the free prescription system doesn't mean that it's not still a shocking anomaly in the system.
Well, it's not a shocking anomaly. We make a political decision. The Parliament made a political decision that free prescriptions is the way forward, and it sort of sends out what sort of society that Scotland is, that people should not have to pay for being ill. This is the cancer drugs. The SMC plays a role in terms of the cancer drugs. The cancer charities have said there's no place for a cancer drugs fund, that it takes money away from where it could be better used. And surely this is the way that we should be looking at it.
Neil Bibby.
We need to help families. SNP slogans aren't going to help families. They need to listen to what people are saying and act upon those concerns.
Well, were the Labour Party helping families when they voted in favour of free prescription charges and in favour of not having a cancer drugs
Well,
fund?
what we're saying is that we need to look at how we best fund public services. We've said that, we made clear. And the most important thing is people like Maureen Fleming and our family getting the support that they need. That's what's important here, and we do need to put party politics aside and work to get the best interests.
This is opposition for opposition's sake.
Okay, James Dornan, I want to move on to the next issue. Ruth Davidson, it's the EU question again. The Scottish Government confirmed last night in a television interview that they do now have legal advice. James Dornan, what is that legal advice?
I wouldn't know what that legal advice is. I'm not part of the Scottish Government, I'm a part of the party that's in it. But the Scottish Government do not give, no government gives the legal advice. They don't do that. They get advice from the law officers, they don't publish that advice. Why is it that Ruth, by the way, I have to admire Ruth Scoll in bringing up the matter of Europe in a week where her party is being dragged by the nose by UKIP to ask for a referendum in the European Union. So the legal advice is not published, as you well know, as Neil well knows, by governments across the UK. Why are they demanding it started now?
Would you like to see that situation change? Would you like the Scottish people to know what the legal advice is?
I'm comfortable that the legal advice says that the position of the Scottish Government is fine.
Well,
if they weren't, then they wouldn't be going.
What is the position of the Scottish Government on this issue?
In terms of European Union, we'll be members of the European Union. When you vote yes next year, we'll be members of the European Union. It's pretty straightforward.
So if you're confident, why not break with tradition and publish the advice?
Why would you break with tradition on this issue? I mean, what that does is it limits the freedom that people have to get advice if they know that every time that they give advice, it ends up in the public domain. And this is what happened in the past. It happened under Labour governments at Westminster and Labour governments' administrations in Scotland.
Neil Bibby, legal advice is legal advice. James Dornan makes the case for it remaining confidential just now.
Well, James makes the point, why should it be published on this issue? We keep getting told by the SNP government, SNP ministers, that this is the most important decision that's going to be made in 300 years. So if that's the case, which is a very important decision going to be made, that we should have that EU legal advice. It's quite simple. If it's such a big, massive, important issue, which I believe it is, I believe the Scottish people believe it is, we want to see that legal advice. I think that's a perfectly reasonable point. If it's, this is one of the biggest issues that's going to be made in our lifetimes, and we need to see that legal advice. And I think it's a very reasonable point. I want to see it. I think the Scottish public want to see it. The only person I think doesn't want to see it is people like James.
I suspect that the Scottish public do not care if they see the legal
I think
advice
they do
or
care,
not.
but
I do not think this is the sort of issue that is discussed in pubs and houses across the country.
James Dornan, are
about
people
the legal
discussing
advice
whether or
on
not to
Europe.
vote yes or no in next year's
Of course
independence
they're
referendum?
they're already
Is
discussing
the
that.
question of Scotland, an independent Scotland in the EU, not a really fundamental part
Yes,
of that decision?
and
So
can I
why
say
not
that the
publish
only
advice?
possible way it looks like that Scotland can stay a member of the EU is to become independent, because it certainly looks like both main parties in Westminster are going to drag us down to that referendum, and the way that the press and some of the right-wing politicians are going down there, we'll be getting dragged out kicking and screaming from Europe.
James Dornan, there's a slight tangent on this question with Ruth Davidson raised. We know last year the Scottish Government went to court to prevent the publication of the legal advice, and it then transpired they didn't have the legal advice at that stage. Ruth Davidson wants to know, will the Scottish Government do the same thing again to prevent this legal advice being published?
Well, we've just answered that. I mean, the fact is that this legal advice does not have to be published, isn't normally published, so why would they publish it in this case? And actually what happened the last time...
Will they spend taxpayers' money to prevent it being published under a
There'd
legal
have to be a challenge for that, wouldn't there, before taxpayers' money was spent on this?
So hypothetically, if there was a challenge?
Well, the same principle applies. The same principle applies, that the system is, the protocols are, that legal advice stays private.
Neil Bibby, James Dornan accused you and the Conservatives in London of being against the European Union. Is that the Labour Party position?
Against the European Union, no.
And being a membership. James Dornan, do you want to clarify that? You said
Yes, what I did say is that the Westminster parties are both looking to have this referendum in Europe. And what that does do is it opens up the very strong possibility that either party, Labour or Tory, that are in government, are going to end up taking us out. Both of them have reacted to the UKIP local election results
Neil Bibby, do you want to address that point?
I think Scotland benefits from being part of the UK. I think Scotland benefits from being part of the EU. I think the SNP government need to publish its legal advice because this is one of the most important decisions that we will make. But also, I think there's a trust issue in this for the SNP government. The fact is, Alex Salmond went on national television at the start of last year saying he had legal advice when he didn't. So, in order for the SNP government to regain the trust of the Scottish people on this issue, they should publish it, and they certainly shouldn't spend taxpayers' money covering it up.
James Dornan, very quick reaction.
Yes. There were two different things here. Alex Salmond gave a very clear answer to a question that was then cut off by Andrew Neil. And when you see the whole interview, you know fine well that what Alex Salmond said was completely accurate.
Okay, we have run out of time. Neil Bibby, James Dornan, thank you both. Thanks for watching. Please tune in next Thursday. We'll be talking about First Minister's questions.